I was unloading camping gear from the back of my truck when a sharp, unmistakable crack echoed across the driveway, the sound of a hand striking flesh, followed immediately by my wife screaming. I spun around and saw a stranger in a black tactical vest standing on our driveway, his hand still raised in the air, while Jade clutched her face and staggered backward. My name is Donovan Wright. I'm 37 years old and an active-duty Army Master Sergeant assigned to the 75th Ranger Regiment at Fort Benning, Georgia. For the past 16 years, I've served in special operations, conducting missions that demanded absolute discipline, split-second decision-making, and the ability to apply violence with surgical precision instead of uncontrolled brutality. My training conditioned me to identify threats instantly, respond with exactly the force required, and maintain control even when adrenaline screamed for total destruction. I was built compact and efficient from years of special operations physical training, not bulky, but functionally strong in the ways that mattered, carrying heavy loads over long distances and staying combat effective for extended periods. My expertise was in small unit tactics, close quarters combat, and leadership under pressure most people could never imagine. But none of that mattered in the 2 seconds it took my brain to register that a stranger had just struck my wife in our own driveway while I was barely 10 feet away. The only thing that mattered was a cold, focused rage that settled over me, tempered by 16 years of learning to control violence instead of being consumed by it. Still, nothing in my career had prepared me for how difficult that control would be when every instinct demanded I end the threat who had just assaulted the woman I loved. I dropped the camping gear and moved toward them with purpose, not panic. Training overriding emotion. Jade held her left cheek, tears streaming down her face, shock and pain written clearly in her expression. The man who hit her was tall and heavy-set, maybe around 50, gray hair visible beneath his cap. He wore a black tactical vest covered in fake patches and held a clipboard in his other hand. Another man in similar gear stood near a dark-colored truck, watching. "Get away from my wife," I said, my voice carrying the same command authority that made Rangers react instantly during operations. "Right now." The man who slapped Jade turned toward me with smug arrogance that suggested he believed he was in control. "Sir, your wife assaulted an HOA enforcement officer," he said. "I defended myself using appropriate force. She's being cited for assault and obstruction." I looked at Jade, 5'4", maybe 120 pounds, a kindergarten teacher who spent her days helping 5-year-olds learn how to read. The idea that she had assaulted anyone was absurd and insulting. "What happened?" I asked her, positioning myself between her and the man. "I was in the mail," Jade said through tears, her voice shaking. "He stopped me and said we had violations. I told him we don't have an HOA and asked him to leave. He said I was interfering with official business. When I pulled out my phone to call you, he slapped me and said I was assaulting him by not cooperating." The man stepped forward, holding his clipboard like it granted him authority. "I am Officer Rutherford Mason with the Creekside HOA Enforcement Division. Your wife became verbally abusive and physically aggressive when I attempted to issue violation citations. I used the minimum force necessary to defend myself from assault. She is being detained pending the arrival of law enforcement to press charges." Every word was carefully chosen to justify violence against my wife, while hiding behind authority he didn't have. I looked at the red mark forming on Jade's cheek, where it struck her hard enough to leave a visible injury. I looked at his hands, still held in an aggressive posture, and made a tactical decision. I pulled out my phone and called 911 while keeping both men in my line of sight. "This is Master Sergeant Donovan Wright at 2743 Oakwood Drive. A man just assaulted my wife by slapping her in the face. I need police here immediately. I am active duty military with the 75th Ranger Regiment. The suspect is still on scene." The dispatcher's tone shifted the moment I identified myself. "Sergeant, units are responding code 3. Are you or your wife injured?" "My wife has visible facial injuries from being struck. The suspect claims to be HOA enforcement. I am maintaining visual contact and will not engage physically unless he attempts to flee or assault my wife again." "Copy that, Sergeant. Officers are 2 minutes out. Do not engage unless necessary for defense." Rutherford turned and started walking toward his truck. I stepped into his path without touching him. "You are not leaving," I said. "You assaulted my wife. Police are on the way. You can explain to them why you struck a military spouse." The second man, later identified as Ambrose Locke, moved toward me aggressively. That was a mistake. My training evaluated the situation instantly. Two suspects, one advancing, confined space, my wife behind me. I needed control without injury while protecting Jade. So I applied a basic Ranger combatives technique, redirecting Ambrose's forward momentum with controlled, minimal force and guiding him smoothly to the ground into a restrained position that immobilized him without causing injury. The entire sequence took less than 2 seconds. Ambrose was face down on my driveway, his arms secured, before he fully understood what had happened. "Do not move," I said evenly. "You are in a control hold. If you struggle, you will injure yourself. Stay still." Rutherford froze, the realization clearly setting in that I was not an average homeowner, and that fleeing or fighting would only make his situation worse. Columbus police arrived roughly 90 seconds later, 3 units responding to a reported assault on a military spouse. Officer Parrish exited the first cruiser and immediately took in the scene, me maintaining control of one suspect on the ground, the second suspect standing rigid and motionless, and my wife holding her face, the injury clearly visible. "Sergeant Wright?" Officer Parrish asked. "Yes, sir," I replied. "The suspect wearing the vest struck my wife in the face approximately 4 minutes ago, when his associate attempted to interfere with my 911 call. I restrained him using military combatives. Neither suspect is injured. My wife has visible facial injury from being slapped." Officer Parrish knelt to examine Jade's face, where the red mark was unmistakable. "Ma'am, did this man strike you?" "Yes," Jade said, her voice still trembling. "I was getting the mail. He said we had violations. When I took out my phone, he slapped me." Officer Parrish turned toward Rutherford, his tone flat and professional. "Sir, did you strike this woman?" "She was assaulting me by refusing to cooperate with official HOA enforcement," Rutherford said, still clinging to his fabricated authority. I defended myself. "You defended yourself," Officer Parrish replied calmly, "by slapping a woman half your size. That is assault. You are under arrest." As officers placed both men in handcuffs, a detective named Esther Crane arrived on scene. Once she learned I was an active duty ranger and that my wife had been assaulted, she took detailed statements and carefully photographed Jade's injury. "Sergeant Wright," she said, "assault on a military spouse is taken very seriously. We will prosecute this aggressively. I am also notifying Fort Benning military police. Crimes against military families are often investigated jointly." Fort Benning Criminal Investigation Division was notified. CID handles serious crimes involving military personnel and their families. An assault on a spouse of a special operations soldier triggered immediate attention. CID Special Agent Morrison arrived within 2 hours. He interviewed Jade and me and reviewed all evidence. "Sergeant Wright," he said, "assaulting a ranger's wife in his presence shows either extreme stupidity or total ignorance of who they were targeting. We will coordinate with civilian prosecutors to ensure this is fully pursued as an assault on a military family." The investigation uncovered that Rutherford and Ambrose had been running fake HOA enforcement scams throughout the Columbus and Fort Benning area, deliberately targeting military families while soldiers were deployed or away training. What they hadn't anticipated was encountering an active duty ranger home, one who witnessed the assault, maintained discipline, and responded with professional restraint that handed prosecutors airtight evidence. The leverage was overwhelming. CID explained to both men that they faced state assault charges along with potential federal charges for targeting military families. Assaulting the wife of a special operations soldier brought intense scrutiny from both civilian authorities and the military community, making the case a top priority. The trial took place 8 months later in Muskogee County. Jade testified about being slapped without provocation. I testified about witnessing the assault and restraining Ambrose without injury when he attempted to interfere. Police officers testified about the scene, procedures, and evidence. Medical experts described the injury to Jade's face. Military family advocacy representatives testified about the deliberate targeting of military spouses. The prosecution emphasized that Rutherford had struck a kindergarten teacher, weighing barely over 100 pounds, then claimed she assaulted him, while her special operations husband stood nearby. The cruelty and absurdity of that claim were impossible to ignore. The defense argued Rutherford felt threatened. The evidence destroyed that narrative. Jade was getting the mail. She took out her phone. He slapped her. There was no threat, only violence. The jury deliberated for 90 minutes. Guilty on all counts, including assault on a female. Sentencing was severe. Rutherford received 14 years in state prison, with enhancements for assaulting a military spouse. Ambrose was sentenced to 9 years as an accomplice. 3 months later, Jade and I were having dinner when she brought it up. "Donovan, when he slapped me and I looked over and saw you, I knew he had made a terrible mistake," she said. "Not because you had hurt him, but because you would make sure he faced justice." 16 years in the Rangers, I replied. "I've been trained to respond to threats with controlled precision. When he slapped you, every instinct wanted me to end him, but my training took over. I called the police, documented everything, restrained Ambrose without injury, and let the system do its job." That's special operations discipline, Jade said quietly. Controlling violence, not being controlled by it. "He's in prison for 14 years, she added. He assaulted a military spouse in front of her Ranger husband. The military community made sure he was fully prosecuted. He learned that targeting military families carries consequences most criminals never face. If you or a military family member is assaulted or targeted, report to both civilian law enforcement and military CID immediately. Joint investigations ensure maximum accountability. Share your experiences in the comments. Subscribe for more stories about military families protected by both civilian and military justice. Remember, assaulting military spouses carries enhanced penalties, and military investigations bring federal leverage. Special operations training is about disciplined, professional response, not uncontrolled violence. Let the system work, and let the military community ensure justice is served.